Hello, namesake. I'm going to take my dog on a walk, but you've got me thinking about decisions, so I'll share my thoughts on that. Mind focus. You got me thinking about a couple things. You've got me thinking about Pascal's wager, decision theory in cases of uncertainty, and you've got me thinking about game theory, which is used more in economics than it is anywhere else. Pascal, sort of created probability theory. So what he wanted to do is figure out a way to think of probability even in situations where you don't have statistical data. So in cases like when you flip a coin, we say it's a 50-50 chance, but really we only test that theory, well, in theory, we test it by statistical data. So we flip a coin 100 times, 50 heads, 50 tails, so then we think that that creates a predictive model of what it would be the odds of next time, and you think that those statistics will play out over time. But in some cases, for Pascal, when he was thinking about whether or not God exists, he wanted to do something else. You've got no statistical data for cases in which God exists and cases in which God doesn't exist. You've got no set of statistical pieces of information, like maybe possible universes or real universes, some in which do or don't have a God, and then you just use that data to judge whether or not you have a God in your universe. So what he did was something that economists now call expected utility. He asks about, basic cost-benefit analysis. What would be the cost of there being a God and getting it wrong versus there not being a God and getting that right? So, of course, if you know much about Pascal, you know that he concluded we should believe in God, since there's infinite gain if he's right and only finite loss if he's wrong. But whether or not you buy Pascal's wager in that case, he's still left an impact on the rest of probability theory. So they're asking a question like, if I do choose the endless supply of Oreos or whatever the case is versus a car, how upset should I be? So you think about this from an evolutionary perspective. You want to really elate a person, or you want to be really elated if you get something right. How you doing? You asked me something that I thought was really fascinating about anxiety. You basically asked me, as I understood it, how should we think about anxiety in that context? So why do we feel anxiety whenever we have no control over the outcome? Whenever one decision is just as likely to produce a good outcome as it is to produce a bad outcome? And that really fascinated me because I don't really think that that's about decision theory. I think you're really asking a question about meaning. So we want to make sure that our action has meaning and it does what we intended. And I think whenever we're in a position where we don't get the feeling that our actions have meaningful consequences, we get really frustrated. Our whole evolutionary design is to frustrate us, to make us feel anxious, to make us feel like something's not right when it thinks that we're in a situation where we may not be in control, where we may not be making a meaningful decision. To your point, it seems that Solomon thinks that the best way to find yourself a meaningful life is to just go for it. Whatever it is, pick it and go all in. You may be anticipating my hesitation. As a more philosophically leaning person, I want to consider everything before I go all in to anything. I want to stop and twiddle my thumbs and sit in an armchair and say, what is the best possible thing? And if I don't know what the best possible thing to do is here, I should have a lot of trepidation. I should not go all in, that's for sure. I should pretend, or I should act as though I should act in the same degree of my certainty. So if I'm very uncertain, I should barely act. And you may predict that that's not a very good way to live, and it often leaves philosophers in existential crisis, where we don't know what to think of our lives, or what to think of ourselves, what to think of our places in our lives. I once was speaking to a friend of mine who is of the impression that maybe nothing else exists except himself. And so in that context, that means only his mind creates meaning. It's sort of this very subjective sense of meaning. So I told him that. It was really comforting to talk to him because it meant that everything I said was meaningless. Let's go. Okay, so what do we say? I think that more than just myself exists. And just like I think that you have a mind and there's minds outside of mine, there's a real objective world. I actually think that meaning is subjective, and it's not something that we self-generate through willing it into existence. We have to find it. We find meaning in our lives in a real objective sense, same way that we discover anything else. I think that Christianity exposes what that meaning is. It reminds me that I'm not the only character in the grander narrative that the Lord is telling with the universe. And that brings me peace. Whenever I feel anxiety, I'm reminded that I have probably been looking at the world through the wrong lens. I'm really narrow focused on my own self, my own sense of meaning personally, but that's not actually right. I'm not generating meaning myself. I need to remember that God is telling a greater story. I was reminded of the Monty paradox. It's a situation where it's a game show. You have 3 doors, just like you were describing, but you pick one, and then they reveal that behind one of the 2 doors you didn't pick is a goat. And then they ask you if you want to change doors. You've got the one that you picked, and then you've got this other door that you didn't pick. And probability theory shows conclusively that you should always switch, because the original decision was made when you only had 1 in 3 chances, and now you've got a 1 in 2 chances. You moved up the ladder from 33% to 50-50. So because you make a new decision under 50-50, you've got more information, you should switch. That doesn't settle right with me. It doesn't settle right with most people. So my point is, probability theory can help us, but it doesn't always help this anxiety issue. So for me, anxiety serves as sort of a bottom of the barrel. I hit the end of my rope, and it reminds me that I have been looking at my life through the wrong lens. So I wanted to ask you if there were some examples in literature that you've encountered of stories of people who hit rock bottom and sort of find that there was a greater purpose that they wouldn't have ever found unless they hit that rock bottom. So what's an example? What can we learn from those kinds of stories, whether it's myth or just something else that you want to share with me? I'd love to hear any other situations in which rock bottom sort of turns out to be what we needed the whole time.